What's up, YouTube? It's ZTAY, aka Lil Red. Today we're going to be talking about my expectations for the San Antonio Spurs. This is the third team that we have made a video on. We have made the Warriors and the Nuggets expectation videos, and now we're on to the Spurs, which is probably my second most, oh my god, how do I put this, excited team to watch in the league. Like, I'm really excited to watch this team, primarily obviously because of Victor Wembanyama. If you guys don't know, you guys probably know by now, especially Spurs fans watching this, you guys know that I love Victor. And it's a lot of fun watching the games with you guys during the season, and there's going to be a lot of reactions every single game, hopefully, from the Spurs this year that Wemby is playing, because I love the new additions to this roster. In year two, Wemby is only going to get better. We've seen in the Olympics that he can be that primary focal of a team going against the best talent in the world. And I was even more impressed because his team had the defensive player of the year on his team in Rudy Gobert, and he actually replaced him in the lineup, which proves that he is a more effective player than the so-called defense player of the year. And if you guys don't know how I feel about this, Wemby should have won Defense Player of the Year. I was very vocal about it. I was pissed he lost. I understand why he lost, because the Spurs weren't a good basketball team last year, and the Timberwolves were, and that's the only reason they won. But in my opinion, Wemby is a much more effective player than Rudy Gobert, and I think we will see that from now on. Last year, I don't think Wemby shot the best from three. It was low 30%, all right? And I don't expect that to happen this year. I think he's going to become a more efficient shooter. I think he had a lot of high volume shots last year that he doesn't need to take because he's 7'5", and I know Shaq is very vocal about that, but at the same time, that's what makes Victor Wembanyama so good, is that he could be a perimeter threat as well. We seen last year that Victor was running pick and rolls as the primary ball handler, and that's going to put a lot of pressure on teams, especially if you bring up some of these shooters to set the screens and have them pop off of it, because we've seen that teams love to hard hedge Victor when he is the primary ball handler. But I don't know if they're going to keep doing that this year, or if they're even going to have to, because we're going to be getting into the roster right now. Lots of exciting teams for this roster going into the next season. Number one, I think this team was really good towards the end of the year, and they were finally starting to find their rhythm. We seen at the beginning of last year, there were moments where it looked like they were not trying to find Victor Wembanyama. Primarily, this was like Devin Vassell, Jeremy Sochan, and maybe even Keldon Johnson. Sometimes Trey Jones, but I think Trey Jones was the first person to actually look his way because he's more of a pass-first point guard. But in all honesty, I don't think that Devin Vassell should be a pass-first guard, because we know Devin Vassell to be an elite, I'm going to say it now, he will be, if not already, an elite scorer in the NBA. I believe Devin Vassell is heading towards being a 20-point per game scorer in the NBA consistently, and especially with the new acquisitions of this team, it's only going to help out even more because they get Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes, and we're going to talk about why I am so high on that in a second. My expectations for the San Antonio Spurs next season is them battling for a play-in spot in the playoffs. I truly believe this team can make the playoffs next year, obviously because they have Victor Wembanyama. I know that they were one of the worst teams in the league last year, record-wise, but when you add Chris Paul, it will change your team, unless your team's name is the Golden State Warriors. We've seen when Chris Paul went to the Oklahoma City Thunder, even late in his career, he made that team really good, and that team had another young up-and-coming star in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They are going with a similar direction in San Antonio because they are going to bring in Chris Paul to help develop, probably, in my opinion, the future GOAT of the NBA in Victor Wembanyama. There's no other better player in the league than Chris Paul to bring in this situation. Number one, because we've seen that Chris Paul can do it. He brought the Thunder kind of up. He's the reason the Thunder started getting good. Yes, they got rid of a couple players after that year, but he's the reason he developed SGA. And if you don't know that story, SGA and Chris Paul are really close, and their families are close too. So he really was a big part in SGA's development. But at the same time, you could argue that's a guard, which brings me to another point, and that's outside of Victor Wembanyama, and that is Stephon Castle. The Spurs took a chance, got a guard. We know they needed some help in that category because Trey Jones was really the only person last year that could do it, because we've seen the Jeremy Sochan point guard experiment just did not work. But now you bring in a young rookie in Stephon Castle, and you bring in a very experienced veteran in Chris Paul, and that is going to help the development of Stephon Castle a lot. And then you bring in Harrison Barnes, who I think is just one of the best complementary role players in the league. He knows exactly what the team needs from him, and I think he was a perfect fit in Sacramento. And they chose to move on from him so they could get DeMar DeRozan. And the Spurs said, hey, let's go pick him up. And this is something the Spurs really lacked last season. They had their scorer in Devin Vassell. Devin Vassell and Victor's two-man game really started coming into something and forming something towards the back half of last season. But I felt like they lacked some shooters around that. They did have Shetty Osman. They had Doug McDermott for a little bit before they released or traded him. I forget which one it was. But they had Julian Champagnie in the starting lineup. You replace Julian Champagnie with Harrison Barnes, that's going to make a huge difference because the Spurs lacked scoring from the wing position. Not just a catch and shoot player, but somebody who could catch the ball when they are helping off of him and make a bucket. Go get a bucket. Harrison Barnes is also a very underrated post player if they need to go to that. He is like a Chris Middleton, and I think that's exactly what the Spurs roster needed. But what they needed more than anything was a guard that knew how to throw lobs. Because we seen last year, I mean, you could just say, just throw it up to Victor. He's so tall. That's like, everybody thinks that, right? But no, I'm going to dive deep into it. I think that Victor Wembanyama can be the best lob threat in NBA history. Yes, we know what he could do isolation-wise, and he could dribble the ball and all that stuff. But if you put him in a system where he could be a lob threat or a popper, which is something that he did a lot last year, and they did not find him at all. But you put a player with that height, mobility, shooting, and finishing skills in that role with the greatest pick and roll point guard that the NBA has ever seen in Chris Paul. Yes, he's older. Yes, we don't know about injuries and stuff, but I think that that is going to be one of the best two-man games in the league. Chris Paul made Dario Saric look like a sharpshooter and an elite post scorer at the beginning half of last season because of that two-man game. Chris Paul helped develop Trayce Jackson-Davis into what he is now as a lob threat. And now you give him the most dangerous threat in the league in Victor Wembanyama, and it is the one thing that the Spurs did not have last year. We've seen that they did not have confident passers, timely passers to make those passes to Wemby. And I'm not saying that these team, I mean, there was obviously the storyline and the rumors that this team was playing ego ball. They didn't want to let a young rookie, be the star of the team yet, and they were still ignoring him and stuff. But I'm not even going to be talking about that because the fact is they did not give him the ball on time so much in the first part of the season. I think the second half of the season he did a lot better, and I think they're starting to realize how good he could be. But I think because of the hype at the beginning of the season and Devin Vassell and Jeremy Sochan trying to prove their worth on this team and show people we're now getting national media, but hey man, we have been holding it down for this team and we're going to try to show you. I think they're going to stop pressing, especially when you enter a piece like Chris Paul who knows how to manage a game. I am so high on this team primarily because of the addition of Chris Paul. I said during the offseason, and Spurs fans know this, that Chris Paul would be the perfect fit for the San Antonio Spurs. I just never thought they would go out and get. We knew for a little bit, hey man, they're in those Trae Young type of rumors, and that is the perfect guard that Wemby needs. And we all said that because we know how elite that Wemby could be in the role as a lob threat or even a popper. Primarily, we want him as a lob threat, though, just because of his size. And Wemby likes to pop and shoot threes. And I think he could be more efficient at that. But I seen so often last year on the pick and pops, they never found him. They didn't trust him. That is all Chris Paul is going to do. Chris Paul does not shoot the ball no more. He only passes. He will make the right read every single time. Now, the biggest X factor for this team, in my opinion, is Jeremy Sochan. He's going to be going back to power forward, playing that role, and I think finally they will find a role for Sochan. They should. They have one of the best coaches of all time, and the point guard experiment didn't work, but in my opinion, it didn't really hurt to try it because they knew they weren't going to be a really competitive team anyways, and it was like a developmental year. But now they know that experiment has passed and it's not the best idea. It's time to move him to the 4. He's a great rebounder. He's a great defender, perimeter and interior. So I think if they could find a role for him and he could become a slightly more efficient shooter, this team will be a lot more dangerous. But I think the biggest X factor is that role that they're going to place Jeremy Sochan in, because I don't want him just being in the corner. I don't think he's that elite of a shooter to be doing that, and I believe he could do other things effective on the court, especially post game. So don't be surprised if you see Jeremy Sochan be placed in a role where he is now setting screens for Chris Paul and rolling, trying to get switches and post up his matchup. Don't be surprised. That's the biggest thing I'm looking for in terms of what is going to bring this team over the top, because we know what Victor Wembanyama is going to bring. I mean, maybe we don't know, because his ceiling is just something that we can't even imagine. We kind of know what Chris Paul is going to do with this team, but at the same time, you don't know how effective it's going to be and whether or not he's going to stay healthy. We know what Harrison Barnes does. He's going to space the floor. He's a floor spacer. He's a low post threat. He's a high post threat. He's a bucket getter. He's a shot creator. He's a all average defender, I guess. We know what not Jeremy Sochan. We know what Devin Vassell is capable of, but now it's what is Jeremy Sochan going to do? What is his role? Now let's talk about the bench a little bit, because I don't know if their bench is the most talented thing in the world, but they do have Keldon Johnson. Keldon Johnson, I believe, could be a starter in the NBA, but on this team, they need him to be that scorer off the bench. In fact, I think they're going to stagger some lineups where he is in with these guys, and maybe Sochan is going to take a break and maybe stagger in with Tre Jones, because Tre Jones is also on the roster as well. And again, we're not even talking about Stephon Castle and how he's going to fit in with this team. I want to see Tre Jones and Stephon Castle in the game at the same time and how that is going to mesh, because that is something I'm interested in. In my opinion, they're both not known to be shooters, even though Tre Jones, I believe, is shooting 45% after All-Star break last season. I still don't want to see them as primarily catch and shoot players, and I both think that they need the ball in their hands. But although I think that Stephon Castle could play off ball a little bit more than Tre Jones, although we've seen Tre Jones really play off ball really elite last year towards the back half. And then of course we know what Julian Champagnie is going to bring. He was thrown into the starting lineup last year and was asked a lot of him, so I think he's ready for this assignment. And it's not going to be too big of a deal. In fact, it might even be easier for him. They still have Zach Collins. Zach Collins actually had a really good start to the season last year, but after that, he was a big disappointment for Spurs fans, to say the least. I think that he could have played a lot better. But he is a big in the league that can shoot. That's always a threat, and he's a low post threat as well. He's really good in the post, actually. He's got a hook game. But I think his defense got to improve. He got 70 points dropped on his head in that Joel Embiid game. Although Wemby gave up some, I need to see his defense improved. But I think, again, maybe if you stagger Chris Paul in those lineups, Chris Paul is going to help Zach Collins out a lot too. So I think Zach Collins will have a better year this year, but I think he also could be in trade talks, although I think Popovich likes him. And that is because they still have Mamu. And Mamu looked pretty damn good towards the back half of last year. So Mamu could be stealing some of those Zach Collins minutes. I do believe that the Spurs actually got rid of Dominic Barlow, which kind of hurts. Let's see if he's still on the roster. Yeah, I don't see Dominic Barlow on the roster. I believe that they lost him. And I know that's not the biggest loss in the world, but I actually thought that he had some potential as a young player, and he was finally starting to get some minutes. But I think Mamu showed, especially during that last game of the year, that he's special. Of course, we still have Blake Wesley. You know, we know what Blake could do, but I don't know if he's going to be playing a lot this year. Last year he did play a lot, but I think there's just the addition of some of these guards, and Stephon Castle and Chris Paul is going to kind of lower his minutes a little bit. And then we're forgetting about Malachi Branham. I truly do not believe he's going to be fifth on this depth chart. And I know this is not the whole roster as well. I know that they still have Sidi Sissoko, I believe. And I know that they got their other draft pick in Juan Nunez, who they were saying is the best pick and roll point guard overseas in the draft, or one of the best. So I think Chris Paul is even going to help him too, even though he is a project player. And I believe Harrison Ingram was also drafted in the second round. So I don't know if those guys are going to get too many minutes. And I truly do not believe Malachi Branham is going to be fifth in the rotation. Malachi is a really solid player. He is still young. He makes a lot of mistakes, but he has showed flashes as a shooter and a scorer. I don't know about defense, but like I said, I think with the addition of Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes, this is going to help all these young guys develop a lot more, because they didn't have those vets that they really badly needed last year. It seemed like Tre Jones had to be the vet, and even he's extremely young, because Zach Collins for sure was not a good vet. But the addition of Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes has raised the expectations of the San Antonio Spurs for myself. And I think the way that the season ended last year has also just really made me believe in this team. And especially in the Olympics, I've seen how good Wemby is. And I just knew that he is one point guard away from becoming one of the best players, if not the best player in the league. And yes, I said it right now. I'm very high on him. So now we're going to go take a look at the Spurs schedule and see how that's looking for them. I'm looking at this schedule, right? And I was like, wait a second, is this the same schedule as last season? But no, this is last season. And this is the upcoming season. They're starting it with the Mavericks and Rockets again. And Rockets back. This is the same way they started it last year. I don't know if they always started this year with the Texas teams, but this is kind of weird. All right, they're going against the Mavericks again for their first game, and then it looks like the Rockets on the road again. What? Rockets back-to-back. This is exactly how it was last season, so it's going to be another test for them. Mavericks game 1 is going to be a huge test, but also the Mavericks are going to be testing themselves because it's a new roster. But again, this is going to be very tough for the Spurs game 1, especially on the road against the defending Western Conference champions. And then they got the Rockets at home, which we seen last year that they battle with them a lot. But these games are very, very tough. These are all big rival games. You never know how the Spurs are going to do. I think that they could win at least one of these, but it's going to be very tough to start the season. And then it gets even harder because they're playing against the best team in the league, in my opinion, in the Oklahoma City Thunder. So the first 4 games of the season for the Spurs are going to be a little bit rough, but I think last year is the same exact way. And we've seen them come out with 2 wins on the road against Phoenix. So I truly believe that they can get it going, but it's going to be very rough to start the season, which is going to battle test them early. You know, we might see a motivated Wemby to start the season. And then we get the Jazz. The Jazz is going to be a very easy game for the Spurs. Most likely they should win this game, but then it's right back to a tough one at home against the Minnesota Timberwolves, which we've seen they can defeat. They beat them last year while the Timberwolves were the number 1 seed. So I think that they can beat some of these teams, but it's going to be tough because then they got the Clippers, Rockets again. Then they got the Blazers at home, the Jazz at home. So those are 2 confident builders at the beginning of November. And then it got the Kings. That's going to be a tough game, but they're still at home. So at the beginning of November, it's going to get a little bit easier because they got the Wizards. And then the Cup starts. Their first game is at home against the Lakers. It's going to be a huge test. As a Lakers fan, it's going to be a very good game. I think they're going to be more competitive this year, but it's also going to be a big test for the Spurs because I still believe that LeBron and AD are good. Then they got the Mavericks, Thunder. They have a very tough schedule. We all know that they have one of the toughest divisions in the league because of those Texas teams, so it's going to be tough for them. It looks like they play Utah Jazz a good amount, and then the Warriors should be a win. I say should be, but right here, 3 very winnable games, even 4. They could beat the Lakers too. But then they got the Kings and Suns back-to-back. That's a little bit tough at the beginning of December. But then we got the Bulls, loosen it up a little bit. The first part of the season looks very, very tough. But then as we move on, November, December, January, it's going to get a little bit easier. You know, we got some break games in between some of these tough games. Kings, Pelicans, Hawks are all tough games, kind of. And then you got the Blazers. Sixers going to be very tough. Knicks in Madison Square Garden on Christmas Day is going to be a lot of fun. And hopefully Chris Paul is healthy at that time because then it will be a very competitive game. Then they got the Nets. All right, confidence builder right here. And then back right on the road into Minnesota. Very tough. Clippers at home. Then they got the Nuggets back-to-back at the beginning of January. Big test for them against Jokic, but I think they could actually win these games, in my opinion. Then you got the Bulls. They could win that game. The Bucks is going to be tough. It looks like we got another Giannis game. This time it's in Milwaukee. I don't even think they played in Milwaukee last year. I could be mistaken, though. And then the Lakers back-to-back in LA is going to be very tough for the San Antonio Spurs because then they go all the way back home overnight, and they got to play the next day versus back-to-back the Grizzlies. And then they got the Heat and Pacers on the road. So they got a little road trip to start January. They might be getting tired right before All-Star break. Back at home for a huge homestand, 4-game homestand, late January, early February against the Pacers, Clippers, Bucks, and Heat. With I think this is going to be huge right here. They're going to have to win 2 of these 4 games if they want to make a play-in tournament game. On the road, Grizzlies versus Hawks. These are winnable games. Especially against the Hornets and then the Magic. They've struggled against the Magic last season just because of size, but maybe it'll be different this year. But the Magic have gotten a little bit better. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough little road trip, even though it looks easy at the beginning of February. But we're trying to coast into All-Star break and see how we're doing halfway through the season. And then the second half, we're starting at home against the Suns. Good test. And then the Pistons. And then we got the Pelicans back-to-back in New Orleans. They should be able to win one of these games. And then the Rockets, Grizzlies, Nets, Thunder, We got the Kings and Timberwolves, 2 very tough games on the road to start March. And then the Mavericks back-to-back. These are going to be fun games because they're going to flip stadiums. Almost back-to-back days. They're going to have one day over. They're going to have a back-to-back with the Hornets and Pelicans, which is never easy, but they are at home, so this should be a little fun part of their portion. This is late March, too. Going into the playoff push, these are must-win games from this moment on. This is going to be the biggest part of the season, so we're going to see what type of teams they're playing at this point. Hornets, Pelicans at home, Magic at home. These could be 3-4 wins. You got a 5-game home stretch to start the biggest part of the season. They got to win at least 3 of these games. They want to be a play-in team. And then they got the Raptors on the road, which they dominated last year. Pistons, Cavs. This part of the schedule, back half going into the playoff run, is going to be huge for them. And they can make up a lot of ground if they are kind of down in the standings. And this is their playoff push. This is their play-in push. The end of the season is looking pretty good. You got the Celtics, but then you get the Warriors. And then the Nuggets to end the year again. No, not to end the year. Cavs, Blazers, Clippers, Warriors. At the end of the year, when they need that playoff push, it looks like they are going to get that schedule that's going to help them with that. So if they could survive the beginning of the year, which is going to be extremely tough for them, I think they're going to struggle the first part of the season, especially with a new roster against some of these elite teams in the West. And then they go through the NBA Cup where they're going to be battle tested again. I think if they could survive this part of their schedule and they get to December, they're going to get a slight little break where December they could find some momentum. And then you hit January, it's going to get a little bit tough again. And then once it's going towards the All-Star break, you're going to get a slight little chill break right into the All-Star break. And then right coming out of the All-Star break, it's not bad. You know, these are all winnable games. They got to have a hot start coming out the All-Star break, maybe heal up some injuries. We could also see some trades at this point, which I don't know if we're going to see any because we've seen that the Spurs are not trying to win right now. They're not going to make any aggressive trades, so I don't expect any. But after All-Star break, they got a lot of winnable games, and it's going to get a little bit tough in the beginning of March. But once you get through this little beginning of March, the home stretch towards the playoffs, they got to win all these games. I truly believe that this team has the capability of making the play-in tournament, and those are my expectations for the San Antonio Spurs. Spurs fans, you guys know I love you guys. Like, you guys are actually one of my favorite fan bases in the league because you guys like real ball. You guys are loyal fans, and those are 2 of the most important factors when deciding a fan base. I had a lot of fun last season. I think they're going to be really good this season. I know you see these logos, and I know we've been rivals in the early mid-2000s, but please, when you see me on this channel, no toxicity this season. I didn't really see it a lot from Spurs fans last year, but you guys might be good again. So my biggest thing is seeing if Spurs fans about to be humble this year, because I truly believe you guys are going to be pretty damn good this season. But yeah, that's my take on the San Antonio Spurs. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe button. If you guys haven't checked out the Patreon, we're going to be doing breakdowns on there this season. I know I tried a couple this season. If you guys didn't see that Knicks versus Spurs breakdown I posted, well, that was actually going to be a very much larger video, but YouTube blocks a lot of my breakdowns because it's too much footage. So we're moving all of that to Patreon for all the people supporting the Patreon. All my Lil Ray members, and there are some free Patreon videos as well, so go check that out in the description. Love you guys, Spurs fans. Let's have a great season, man. High expectations for the Spurs, but not too high. Anyways, leave a comment. Want to hear from you guys. Love you guys. Peace.